Woohoo-hoo, Unicross back, and today I'm going to be doing something I've never done before, and that is an official commentary over my Last Airbender Re-Edit. And the closest commentaries I've ever done on this channel were playing video games, but I've never done a commentary where I'm basically reviewing my own works and giving thoughts to you guys. So this will probably be divided into chapters, so each commentary is going to be over each chapter of the edit that I've done, and I figured you'd be interested to hear my thought process throughout editing this entire film, which my editing of this did begin sometime in the fall of 2019. Fast forward to today of recording this, it is March 1st, 2025. So that's a massive amount of time that's passed since I've began working on this. And the reason why it has taken so long to get the edit finished is because I've been busy with life. I have a full-time job and I've got school to deal with, and I'm already doing videos in relation to my job, so I'm already busy editing wise doing other things, unfortunately. But I do have time, thankfully, to go through and to share all of my whole thought process of why it turned out the way it did, why it's an hour and 15, and why I couldn't make the re-edit longer. Why were there some scenes that I couldn't have just cut all together that were still bad? Was there a way for me to fix the earthbending camp scene? So this will all be answered throughout the commentary. So feel free to skip ahead if there's certain scenes you want me to talk about. I will not talk about every single fix that I did. So today we will at least go through chapter 1 of this video and see where it goes. So up already, this is the disclaimer I put, just because fan edits tend to do that, and I want to be legally safe. There's my lovely logo, a Unicross re-edit. This will probably be the only film that I ever do a re-edit for, just because of how busy I am and how long. It's already taken me like 5 years just to get this one movie done that's below 2 hours, so I don't think... If I was to edit something, I might maybe do the Star Wars sequels, but that would just take me way too freaking long. So we open up. This is how the original movie began. I'm keeping the volume low for this video just to try to avoid copyright. So if you guys want to watch this, it is available on my channel right now. Go to the posts section of the Unicross channel. You'll find a link to be able to watch this alongside commentary. Yeah, so this is all the same, and the reason I kept this the same is it's a nice way of opening up The Last Airbender. I like the music of it, I like the text of it, I like how you're slowly building up the mood.
Water.
Now, first notable change here, I added in Katara saying earth, fire, air, water, and
Fire.
originally these words were recorded by a YouTuber Walk Like a Wayfinder, and I since replaced it with AI voice provided by Anarchy Productions, who will be in the channel. I'll link his channel below. And so this here, the first opening minute, is the most incomplete part of my re-edit as of right now. It is not finished, it's not perfect, the AI voices are a bit rough at this time, but this is an idea of what to expect when it's polished. So the AI Katara right now is basically, I took a combination of what Katara said in the cartoon show and I mixed it in with what is said in the movie and combined it into one for the prologue. So it's very close to the cartoon, but I didn't want to copy it. I didn't want to come across as a plagiarist. I just realized I'm actually going to move my camera to this side because I realized I'm looking this way where my monitor is. Okay. Huh, that's weird. Alright, we'll continue. And the main change that I was trying to get with this is for the exposition is that Shyamalan's movie never tells us that there was a war with the Fire Nation, that there hasn't been a war declared, that the Fire Nation attacked, and he does say that the Avatar disappeared, but he doesn't say much else. And so that was the main exposition I was trying to add with this prologue, is Katara mentioning the Fire Nation's taking over, they're getting close to winning the war. So that was mainly what I was going for there. And we get to chapter 1, The Boy in the Iceberg. And the reason why I called it The Boy in the Iceberg, it's just a little tribute to the original cartoon or anime, whichever you prefer. And Boy in the Iceberg is a nice title because it is about finding Aang. He's in an iceberg, thankfully. It's just basically the same story that we got from the original cartoon. So why change such a nice title? So right away, throughout most of Chapter 1, I have this light blue filter applied through all the shots, with some tweaking here and there for some lighting adjustments. And I did that to make the snow look a bit more white that you can see around. So it was a bit green, weird green in the last one. And there's lovely Sokka.
I'm sorry.
And him saying Katara there was not in the original. That was when, in the original, he says Katara when Katara accidentally turns him into an ice cube. And I put that there because I skip over that scene altogether. But it was a nice delivery of how he said Katara. It's a bit goofy, it's a bit Sokka-like, so I thought that could be humorous to add that there. Show them that they're bickering siblings.
Tiger Seal.
Are you sure?
And right here I add a crossfade to this shot here was placed in a different part of the movie. And the reason I did because in the original version, we are holding on this shot for like 10 extra seconds longer than we need to. And as you can see, the environment is very different from the next shot that we cut to, which is here. So it's here that in the original movie, we go from this shot straight to this shot, but the environment is so different. So that's why I add a little thing here to make it seem like they're traveling very far, and so the environment's naturally going to change in your mind. And right here, I have removed Sokka's weird exposition about his dad basically teaching him hunting skills and him still being a crap hunter. And the reason I trimmed that exposition is the same reason I trimmed a lot of exposition throughout this movie, is that either it's delivered really bad or it's really unnecessary through the story, or sometimes they're trying to build up hints, like they make a mention of Hama later on in the film originally, teasing that Hama might return in the third movie. But since this trilogy is never going to get finished, since it's an incomplete story, there's just no point in having all these setups for films that we're just not going to see. So I figured, why not condense this into its own story as much as possible, which includes cutting a lot of the exposition. And it's nice setups when they do that, like mentioning Hama and hinting that Katara's dad is out there fighting. But because this is a single story with it's very limited on what we have access to work in a nice, cohesive, self-contained story. So I just made the choice to remove all those little hints because we're never going to see them go anywhere. And I'd rather the focus be on what we do have. I'd rather there be more focus on Aang, more focus on Team Avatar, just more focus on the characters that are present, that we know we will be spending time with for the next hour, instead of worrying about stuff that we're never going to have.
It's caving. Move away from the cracks.
And yeah, this is relatively the same. I cut a few shots of them running from the ice because it just wasn't. It created some weird inconsistencies in their movements. They looked a little jumpy if you go back and watch the original film. Like Sokka practically teleports with the ice. It's weird. So I got rid of it to just solve that little problem.
Don't go near it. This is probably some Fire Nation trick.
I don't know how this is he calls it a Fire Nation trick. I guess that's Sokka-like. Right here. And right here there's a nice little change where I have Sokka
Do not hit that.
boom. So for those who probably don't remember, because it's been a long time since most have seen the original movie, in the original she takes his boomerang and it takes Katara 3 hits to break the ice. And I edited it so that she hits it once and it just breaks. And the reason for that is because it came across as goofy in the original film, but this is a film that's trying to take itself more seriously, so the comedy sadly doesn't always work like it did in the cartoon.
Katara.
So right here, boom. That's why there's already the reason why there's cracks here already is that in the original film, she had struck this thing 2 times already. So this is actually her 3rd hit and it interrupts Sokka's words. So I did that to try to make there be more tension, to increase the drama a little bit, and to keep the ball rolling. And so boom, she just hits it once, it hits into Sokka. We keep the story moving without a weird, needless bash. It was just weird in the original. And I cut Zuko's line there when he says, "Uncle, look," because it sounded like a dub over, and his mouth doesn't move when he says those words. It sounded weird. And so by keeping him quiet, it also makes you wonder, who is this guy? What does he sound like? I do like this shot a lot. Appa looks okay in this, even for 2010. I know that a lot of Appa, they did have a practical model for him, so he does look pretty good in this. Even in the Netflix, he does as well. Here I've also cut a lot of lines where in the original Katara kept asking him, "Are you okay?" She was asking, "What's your name? How did you get here? How did you get in the ice?" And it takes her... It's weird. So she's just asking all these questions when she just found an unconscious boy from the ice. And I cut those questions to make her seem a bit smarter and considerate of Aang.
He's exhausted.
And so he's exhausted.
We need to get him back to
She
the
just
room.
deduces that immediately, and it's reasonable. You don't need to keep asking Aang questions. And this is a goofy moment that I like, but
What is this thing?
I think what ruined it in the original movie was right after Sokka's tail comes down, or right when Appa's tail comes down on Sokka. In the original film, it goes on another 10-12 seconds where Sokka is struggling to get up and is just angry. But I figured by cutting it here, it would be a little goofier. Don't have that extra 10 seconds of strange lingering. So it's up, and then yoink, and then boop. And this is another change I did through the edit, is I've added in Southern Water Tribe, Northern Water Tribe, Spirit World. I did this just because we have such little time in this world to explain what everything is, and if you haven't seen the original cartoon, you're not going to entirely follow what is what. So I figured just a little fun exposition with text from the cartoon. I would just establish this is the Southern Water Tribe, and it's not the same thing as the Northern Water Tribe. And we cut to Gram.
I knew from the first time we
And if you look closely, as she's talking here, her words do not entirely match what is said. So I'll go through it right here. The reason why her words are a little off here is because what she is saying in this scene is not what she actually says in the original movie. In the original movie, she's talking about her friend Hama, the bloodbender, she's talking about Hama, that Katara, that there hasn't been a Southern Water Tribe bender since Hama was taken away, and she's talking about the fact that Katara is the only Water Tribe bender left in the Southern Water Tribe. And the reason I replaced that exposition with the lines in here about Aang and Destiny is because I'm trying to make the focus more on Aang and more on Katara than just having, as I said earlier, mentioning a character that we're never going to see. It's just not needed now because the trilogy is not going to be complete. So it's pretty close in the words with how I dubbed that. I moved the lines.
That destiny.
And originally I did not want this scene. I didn't think it was useful originally because of most of it is just pointless stuff about Spirit World. But like in the second half she'll talk about the Spirit World, but then I realized that it's also one of the few scenes in the movie where the Spirit World is even talked about here's what it is to the audiences that don't know.
A long time ago.
So all I did here when I added it back in is that I trimmed a few lines to make it a bit more straightforward and to make it less corny sounding, less cheesy.
Most exotic. Valleys, mountains, forests.
So that's really the only change I did, and I actually like that this scene is now in the edit because, so in the original, just to establish, this scene actually happens when Zuko has already taken Aang away, and which makes the edit go really fast when you're trying to trim down and get to Zuko coming. So when I got to the point where Zuko had arrived and this scene was cut, I realized things were moving way too fast in the original. So by including this scene, specifically putting it before Zuko arrives and before Aang is taken away, it adds a little bit more space. So there's a bit more time passing before things start to feel like they're moving too quickly. But that said, things are already moving quicker in this version because while I have to cut out a bunch of crap, in the process, it's also cutting down the runtime, which you see down here. Like the whole edit's around 65, 75 minutes, including credits, whereas in the original film, it was almost an hour and 45. So a lot is already cut, which on the one hand, it's getting rid of problems, but then you're creating this other problem and concern of pacing, of, okay, you've cut this stuff out, but now things are moving pretty fast. So putting this here before Zuko arrives helps with that. And it also allows Katara to figure out who Aang is before she goes in and meets him, because in the original, she already goes into the tent and just talks to him, but in this one, she's going in with a sense of, okay, so this boy's important. So I don't need to ask as many questions as I did in the original movie. Yeah. I still think this is a bit of a cheesy scene with the theme of like it's the heart that all wars are won, and but it is what it is. Sadly, couldn't do much with it. And right here, already a big change here.
What's your name?
Katara asks Aang, "What's your name?" This was a problem in the original because she didn't ask him this question until they got to the air temple, and by putting it here, by having this be the first question she asks, already that's fixing that problem. And it's a natural question to ask. What is your name? How do I address you throughout this journey? Versus waiting a few hours later to finally ask him. It's weird. And that what's your name was done through AI by Anarchy Productions. And him saying Aang, so that is not Noah Ringer's voice. That is not AI. That is actually the original voice actor. So that is Zachary, the original guy who voiced Aang in the cartoon. I actually went through interviews of the old cartoon series, and I was listening to the original kid actor, Zach, saying Aang's name. And what I did was I took a snippet from one of the interviews of him talking about Aang. I cut it down to when he says Aang, and then I distorted it to sound closer to Noah Ringer. So it's a nice little tidbit. And it's close, it's not perfect, but just a nice idea there of how I got that voice.
I ran away from home. We got in a storm.
And
Forced under the water of the ocean.
and so now Katara already has,
I was just
it's nice that she already has that exposition of, okay, you're the Avatar, you're an airbender, you're very important.
Oh, I'll be worried.
So there's a nice little gravitas in this scene now. The acting's still not good, but can't really fix that, unfortunately. And which I did here that I'll talk about is Katara asks Aang, are you not still upset about running away? In the original film, Aang says, not as much as I was, and he says it pretty cheerfully in delivery, but I cut that instead to his face looking a little somber, and because by him not answering the question, it can imply to the audience, okay, maybe he's not ready to open up yet, because running away from your family, running away from your monkey Otso father figure might be something you don't want to answer in a cheerful tone. So by him not opening up yet is natural. I think that's better than just having that weird happy delivery of, I'm not as upset as I was. So that's why I did cut that line out in this final version 1 draft. The design of Zuko's ship I do like that a lot. Just a little compliment to the original film. And the only change I made here is that Sokka mentions a couple times in the original film that the Fire Nation has these war machines, but we never see these war machines ever, so I cut any mention of those machines out of this edit, including this conversation here. So, yeah, so then the Fire Nation arrives. This is all relatively the same. I trim a few bits here and there to keep the ball rolling, to keep the focus on Zuko arriving, to be on the moment of the current present danger. And right here, I insert a shot right here of Zuko taking his helmet off. And I got that from the behind-the-scenes footage. So for those wondering, so this was hard to fit into the original edit color-wise, because you look here, a little different, but it's very close to the movie. So yeah, this is not from the original film at all, for those who weren't aware. And then right here, it moves a little fast, but this shot, this is actually a reverse shot when Katara tells Sokka to not go for his boomerangs, which I cut that part when Katara tells Sokka to not attack the Fire Nation. And the reason I do that is because later on you'll see that Sokka says the same thing to Katara about her waterbending water. So it was weird that both of them, I found it strange that both of them had a moment where they were telling the other to calm down and to not attack the Fire Nation. And I asked myself, well, why don't we just let one of the characters do that, so that way we can establish a dynamic between the two, that one is more likely to attack the Fire Nation than the other. And in this version, I chose Katara to be the one that's less likely to control herself, because in this version, from what I understand, she is younger than Sokka, and Sokka is supposed to be more mature and serious in this version. So naturally, it would make a bit more sense for him to be calm than Katara. I also did cut Zuko's line mentioning go find an old person, because sadly in the movie, while it makes sense to us why Zuko is looking for an old guy, because it's assumed that, okay, the Avatar, if he's alive, he's got to be 100 years old. I cut that mention of him, like, bring me all the elderly, because the movie never explains why Zuko wants the elderly. There's no mention of why. I could have maybe tried to do an AI for it, but I don't know where I would play.
Grandma.
And so right here, you're now going to see Sokka tell Katara to calm down instead of vice versa. So that helps with the dynamic a bit, that Sokka is the one that's more calm and collected, and Katara has a bit of emotional stuff going on right here. So there we got it. And then the rest of this is relatively the same, a few little trims. And also, it is a bit strange that in the movie, they're told to go for an old person, but then they go for a young Aang anyway. So by cutting it, it also makes it less confusing. In that aspect, at least. And right here, I cut a few lines where he just pulls Aang up to him, get the ball rolling, just like with all the other expositional lines of dialogue here and
I
there.
don't need to tell you anything.
And here's a nice change where we are shown the firebenders threatening the village, whereas in the original, we are instead held on this shot and nothing happens. So this shot here, I put it happens earlier so that we can establish the threat sooner, because in the original, we're in on Zuko and nothing's happening. So by showing that, already we are showing that the stakes are high and that they're willing to kill a bunch of people. So that was a benefit of putting the firebender threat earlier. We cut to Zuko's nice ship, and right here, Iroh says his name correctly. It was not through AI, it was through practical editing, if that's the way to put it, where I simply took a snippet of the actor here who plays Iroh saying I from a different sentence, and I just pasted it over when he says E-row, so that it sounds like I row. Like I'm rowing a boat, and I made that sound like I row.
What do you want us to do, Katara?
And here's another nice trim. I cut this conversation a little short, and then the shot that we get right here, this was originally the shot that we see before we talk to Gram Gram. In this version, I have now moved it to imply that instead of it being Grandma's tent, it is Katara and Sokka's tent. And the reason I did that was because I had already moved Gram Gram's scene earlier. So where else do you put this shot? And so this is the only place for me now left to put it, to establish whose hut this is. And right away, I start right in the middle of this conversation, where the opening line is Sokka asks, "What do you want us to do, Katara?" And in the original version, we get a couple more lines, like 30 seconds, where Katara is upset that Aang got taken. We should go search for him. He's our responsibility. He's like family. And I cut that because, one, the delivery is very cringe, and two, there is so little time in this version and in the last version of them hanging out. It didn't make sense. It didn't seem to make sense yet for them to have that sense of family and bonding, because they only had one scene together, and it wasn't as earned as the cartoon, because at least in the cartoon you got a 2 to 3 episodes or so before Katara started relating it to family, when they actually got to know each other more. And also, it's important to note, Aang does not disclose why he ran away from his family. He doesn't know that the Airbenders are dead, so they can't relate. They can't relate to that loss of family yet. So there's not as much reason for Katara to feel bad for Aang in the movie versus the cartoon, where a lot is already revealed before she expresses responsibility to Aang. This was confusing. It took me several watches to figure out what the hell Shyamalan was going for. So the big plot hole to this in the original is that these elements react for no reason to the Avatar. And it's like, why? And so what I did here is I added spirit effects. You can hear it if you watch this. You can hear these ghost effects that I added in. And the reason I did that is to imply that these objects are spiritual, that the water that you see, that the rock that you see in a moment, and that the candlestick that you see, they have spiritual properties. And so that's why in this version I'm trying to imply that they're having an effect on sensing the Avatar because these are special objects, not because, like with the rock, this is the only rock in the original film, we're coming up on the shot, that does that. But why? And so by implying that it's spiritual, that answers the plot hole. That already solves it of, okay, so these are probably spiritual elements. And if you remember from the cartoon, this also goes in line with Iroh's character, because he's more attuned with the spirit world than most characters in the original series. He can see Aang riding the spirit world dragon in an early episode. And I think he does have a few spiritual objects with him in the show. So it's also, in a way, it's also faithful to the cartoon, because it can imply that Iroh collects this stuff and uses it, and I guess that the Fire Nation, or that the Fire Nation as a whole, collects it. But it makes sense even for Iroh to have these objects. So it's a change that works, and it's still faithful to the cartoon. And right here, the bending is much, much, much better in the movie. It's quicker, it's cut down more, it gets to the point, and you will see this later on when Pakku bends his water. So like right here, this is a huge fix. Aang moves fast and he just, boom, gets right out. In the original, this was garbage. Aang was taking multiple steps to do airbending. He wasn't doing it quick enough. He was doing it so slow that you could just grab him before he finished his airbending moves. And what I did here is I sped it up, I chopped it down, just so that he flomps right over their heads and just gets the pacing moving. So now he's more of a threat now by doing that. So now the airbending is taken more seriously, but Aang as a character is now taken seriously as well, because he's pretty skilled, even for a young boy. He's not easy to catch, and you're now shown more convincingly why he's a threat, even before he becomes an avatar. And a nice little thing up here is I also added a little winter filter here, but this whole thing is heavily trimmed. It would take too long to talk about, but I'll do it a little briefly. In the original, he hops and then he opens the glider. The reason I removed the hop is you don't need to do a freaking hop to open your glider. You can just open it. Yeah, it looks cool. It could be cool if he's showing off to Katara and Sokka, but it's weird when you're trying to escape and you're a young kid. You're going to have a lot of stress in this moment. You're just going to have to get that glider going and move the heck out of that ship. I also cut Zuko's line where he says, hey, you got nowhere to go. Well, he's got a glider, though. So, I guess he doesn't have anywhere to run, but he has anywhere to fly. And, yeah, so that's what I did. I trimmed it down a little bit. He opens his glider and just gets out there because gets the ball rolling. That's going to be a common theme throughout this watch-through series, is that many things are cut just to get things going, to cut down exposition, to get to the point quicker, such as this moment here. He says, I have to go back now. Katara says, we're going with you right there, and then they leave. In the original, what happens is, Aang says, I have to go back now, but then we're holding on Sokka in the original, where he says, oh, we'll go with you. And then Aang says, well, but I can take you back to the village. And then Katara goes, we're going with you. By having Katara just say, we're going with you, and Sokka saying nothing, it's already implied that both of them have already made up their minds. And it makes them come across as more determined characters now. Like, they are now set on this journey. There's no hesitation. We're going with you. And it's not great because it's not as earned as it was in the cartoon, but only so much you can do with that aspect. So that I cut it, get to the point, move on. And I did cut Qatar's narration right here, where she gives us all this exposition about how Aang survived the ice, and she's giving all this exposition about how Aang airbended a bubble around him in an ocean, and that's how he survived a winter storm, but then he doesn't remember anything because it's been 100 years and his brain's going through... It was all this stuff we just didn't need, and by cutting out the narration, there's a bit of an effect with a silent gap to digest what we just saw. So there's less to digest. It's like the same reason I cut a lot of the exposition. Besides keeping the ball rolling, you have less to process overall, because one of the biggest problems with these kind of adaptations is that most of them tend to fall into this horrible curse of explaining too much in too little time, and so you lose track of trying to keep up with everything. And so then when you rewatch, you gotta basically rewatch the film several times to get all the expositional pieces of, if you haven't seen the cartoon, about how, okay, so that's how that works, that's how this works, oh, that's his name, I forgot what his name was, oh, that's why he did it. And so it just takes too long, and you gotta sometimes cut that down to make it easier for us to digest, especially if they don't know the original source material.
This is where you live?
And we're coming up on another nice little cut where, as I mentioned earlier, I have removed the part here where Katara asks Aang's name, because one, it makes you look stupid to ask him it now. At this point, see, we cut through it. It's a weird moment for her to ask his name in the original, so by putting it earlier, it makes her look more competent. And also, you don't have to be reminded of that weird delivery of the monks named me Aang. And boom, I cut a line there where Katara says, "Your friends were monks," because Aang had already explained. For those who don't remember, in the original film, we zoom in, and then Katara's supposed to say, "Your friends were monks?" Well, I cut that part, "Your friends were monks," because Aang had already said that to her literally a minute or two ago. He said that, yeah, my father was Monkey Otso. Or, I mean, he said that Monkey Otso was like a father figure to him, not his father. Like, it's already implied, like, he lives here. He's talking about all these monks being his friends already. He's saying Chinto and Bonet. He's already told Katara that his friends are monks, or at least she should have been smart enough to figure it out by now. So it's another moment where she looked stupid in the original, and by cutting it and not having it, it makes her look a bit more competent. So another moment of making Katara look a bit smarter. And there's a jump cut here where Katara just teleports. I couldn't fix that. She just teleports. And here she says Aang 2 to 3 times. All 3 of those times in this version are AI, once again provided by Anarchy Productions. So most of this is relatively the same. I cut out Aang's "you're lying" scream to get to the point quicker. So he finds Monkey Otso's body. This is all relatively the same. Little trims here and there. Not much different. This was going to be black and white, these 2 shots, because of the old trope about how flashbacks tend to be black and white. I'm very glad I did not go about that, though. I like it in color. And this is pretty much the same, except the very lightly bluish sky up here. And then we're about to go into the spirit world, and you'll see that there's spirit world text that pops up at the bottom, simply because not everyone's going to know that this is a spirit world. The movie never tells you necessarily until later. Just a nice little... For those of you who don't know, this is the spirit world. It's not really needed, but I just did it just in case. And it's a consistent thing that I do throughout this edit, is I put text in to explain where they're at. So that is consistent at least. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the spirit world or not, the text. The only change here up to this point is the coloring. So in the original, this was all green, and I replaced it with blue, partly to match the cartoon, but also it looks more ghostly. There's a more ghost... For whatever reason, maybe it has something to do with Star Wars' Force Ghosts, but blue just seems to look better on spirits than just a nasty, tainted green. And right here, you will hear this Yeah,
know
this
you're
is
a
not
friend,
AI.
and I
This
know what
is
it's like
Walk
to
Like a
just love
Wayfinder
someone.
voicing
Fuck, and
Katara's
I've been through
lines.
the same thing
And the
once.
reason that I had these lines, the reason why she's saying the lines that she does here is because in the original movie, what Katara says to Aang is that, Aang, I know you're upset that you just lost Monkey Atso, but you have me and Sokka. We can be your family. But that felt really, it just didn't seem earned because the movie's moving too fast. Just like I said earlier, there's more time spent in the cartoon to make that moment feel more earned than it does in the original version. And even in this re-edit, it's still not quite earned. So I had to. There was a problem I was trying to solve. Of okay, what can we do to with these narrations to help this edit a bit more? What information can we add to make it matter more? And the information that I decided to put in was that Katara goes on to tell Aang that she knows what Aang is going through because she and Sokka had lost both their mother and father when they were kids, and which is not what happens in the cartoon. I know they eventually meet. Katara's dad will show up in book 2, I believe, but the reason I decided to make that change and to have it so that both their parents are dead is simply because this trilogy is incomplete. It's never gonna. None of that stuff's gonna matter because we're never gonna get a sequel. So we're never gonna see the dad to begin with, and because Katara and Sokka have very little anything in this movie, they don't have much character. They don't have very little of their background is known to us in the film version. So by adding that little layer, explaining that both their parents are dead, you feel a little bit more bad for them. There's more opportunity for that, and Aang can also relate now to Katara better because they both know what it's like now to lose a loved one. And in this case, it's a father and a mother for Sokka and Katara, and whereas for Aang, it's all the people that he just lost. So Aang and Katara can now have more relation there. But I just then cut it to where Katara says, hey, we can do this together. There's no mention of them being family. There's no mention of them saying we can be friends because it's not quite earned yet. And it would have just been... that's really it. It just would have been weird. And right here is a really nice change. We're coming up on Zhao's very first scene right around here. So, for those who don't remember, in the original movie, Zhao... This is Zhao, if I have to explain that. Zhao's first scene was he meets up with Zuko and he berates him for a minute or two and makes fun of him. Whereas I've made this the first where he's on his ship and he's just being a dutiful commander, trying to concentrate on the war, trying to concentrate on the fighting, and he doesn't say anything and he looks serious. And then it cuts straight to the Fire Nation and it just gets the ball rolling. And the conversation that they have here with the fire. So this is there's a lot of changes here already in one of these this is the last scene of chapter 1. So already there's so much going on in this change because in the original, Fire Lord Ozai and Zhao are having this conversation in a different room with the cameras, with both of their faces being present. And in the original, there are two things they talk about. The first half, they talk about Zhao finding scrolls at the Forbidden Library and about how they lead to these moon spirits that we can kill to take over the Northern Water Tribe, and with this information we can rule the world, and blah blah blah, all this exposition. And then the second thing they talk about is Aang, which is what they talk about here. And I cut the first half of the conversation about the Northern Water Tribe and the waterbending or the spirit scrolls, all that, because it's not stuff we need to know yet. Because nobody at this time, we have no clue what the Northern Water Tribe is. We don't have a reason to care about these scrolls, at least right now, because the focus right now is Aang, and it's the Last Airbender, and you want the focus to be more on the Last Airbender. And if you're including all this other expositional stuff, it's a lot to already keep track of. And so I've reduced it so that they're only talking about Aang in this conversation to make it simpler and to show that there is a lot of priority in catching Aang. And it also reduces Zhao's motivations because in the original, Zhao has a lot of at least 3 motivations. He wants to become better than Zuko and have more power than him. But he also wants to take over the Northern Water Tribe and end the war. But he also wants to hunt down the Avatar. For something like this, where there's so little story to work with, I wanted there to be a very simple focus for Zhao, a very simple motivation, and I cut it down from 3 to 1, that being, let's go capture the Avatar and get my promotion. And later on, you still have that. He still wants to take over the Northern Water Tribe and be better than Zuko in this edit later on, as you'll see. But that's not going to be focused right now. And then the other change I will talk about here is that Ozai's face is hidden. And I went about this change, one, because it's faithful to the cartoon, but the other reason is that in all the other scenes in the original movie, his face is visible. But then for whatever reason, we get this camera angle, and we don't know why they're not showing his face when we've already seen it. So I figured, well, why not use just this angle? Because one, it makes it faithful to the cartoon. Two, it actually makes the Fire Lord a bit more sinister, because by hiding that face, there's a bit of a sinisterness of how serious does he look? What does he look like? Does he have battle scars?
They describe him as just.
So I chose to keep his face hidden throughout most of this edit to try to elevate that he is someone to
We have many
fear.
independent people under our control.
And I like
They
the
can
cut
leave
to the
soldiers
ring
hidden
here.
in certain locations.
And my son.
He had his
And
choice.
that's not what he says in this scene. So all they're talking about in this scene are from another scene. I just copied and pasted them over into this one to try to make it worth. If you
People under
closely, the
our
mouth,
control. I can leave
the
soldiers hidden
mouthing
in
of the
certain
words is not
locations.
perfect except for like here.
My son.
Like he says my son here, but in the original that's not the line. And then we get the chapter 2. So that is my rundown of a lot of changes that of my thought process throughout chapter 1. I will do chapter 2 in a separate video just for copyright reasons, just to play it safe here. I hope you enjoyed this commentary. I will be making more. Let me know if you think I talked too much, if I didn't talk enough, if you want me to do more of these commentaries, if you want me to make a video talking about just one scene, let me know. If you have questions in the comments I didn't answer, I'll happily answer them when I can get around to them. But yeah, that'll be it for my chapter 1 commentary of my Airbender edit. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you soon digitally. Woohoo, Unicross out. Peace.